Hello everybody, Maven here, and if you look at my hunter stat setup, you might think that looks incredibly good, right? Well, that's actually bad. And if you look at my warlock or titan stat setup, you might think that looks incredibly good as well, but that's also wrong. Every day when I log into Destiny 2, I see a handful of players with seemingly perfected builds, but they actually have a lot of wasted stat points in areas they should not be distributing. Because in this stat metagame, there are two things a lot of players don't know about, and that is sweet spots and diminishing returns. Now, I did make this exact video before a year ago, and that video actually blew up pretty well. It has 71,000 views at the time I'm recording this, but it still seems that a majority of the community doesn't get the point of stats. There's still a lot that people don't know. So let's break it down once again for the newcomers. Hope you enjoy. So most of this video is going to take place on d2armorpicker.com, and I assure you that this is not a sponsored video. It's just facts that this is the best resource to create builds in Destiny 2, and if you're not using this website, you're throwing. So first things first, let's talk about penalties. Now, the bare basics here, but the top three stats dictate your class ability depending on which class you are, and the bottom three stats dictate your actual abilities, your grenade, your super, and your melee. And these bottom three abilities are prone to something called penalties. If you hover over any ability, you can see at the bottom of where they're labeled that they have a base cooldown. Grapple 122, Threaded Spike 140, so on and so forth for every ability in the game. Silk Strike, for example, has a base cooldown of 916. So if I go over to my stats here, let me fix this so I hit tier 3. You can see that my base cooldown for my super is 916. If I bring it up to tier 4, we hit 847. But if I dip below tier 3, we hit 1036. So you have to achieve tier 3 of an abilities tier to be able to achieve the base cooldown labeled in your subclass. If you dip below that, you actually get a penalty to its base cooldown, and if you go above that, that is how you actually improve it. But tier 3 across the board for every ability in the game is going to be its bare minimum to achieve its base cooldown. So let's go back over to D2 Foundry, and in this website you can see when you hover over different tiers of your ability, you can see the different cooldown changes. So tier 3 is going to be the minimum intellect that you want to invest, because if you dip below that, you get a massive 1 minute 20-second penalty to the cooldown. Now, like I said, this whole penalty idea applies to these bottom three abilities. Don't worry about it for recovery, resilience, and mobility. We'll talk about that later. But for discipline and strength, it's a bit different. The minimum you want to invest is going to be tier 2 on each of these abilities, and here's why. So let's take a look at our Threaded Spike's base cooldown of 140. If we invest to tier 4, we go down to 130, we gain 10 seconds. But if we go from tier 3 and drop down to tier 2, it goes down to 144, we lose 4 seconds. But if we go from tier 2 to tier 1, it goes to 153, and we lose another 9 seconds. So 3 to 4, 10 seconds, 2 to 1, 9 seconds. But the difference between 2 to 3 is only 4 seconds. It's pretty negligible. Same thing goes for discipline. Look at our grapple, for example. It's at 122 as our base cooldown. If we invest to tier 4, it goes to 114. That's 8 seconds. If we drop down to tier 2, we only lose 3 seconds, 122 to 125. If we go from tier 2 to tier 1, we lose 8 seconds. So 8 seconds here, 8 seconds here, but the difference between 2 and 3 is only a 3-second difference. Again, very negligible. So the bare minimum for discipline and strength you're going to want to invest in is going to be tier 2. So if you're doing a build that doesn't care about discipline or strength, at least manage to hit tier 2 so you don't get a huge penalty. So now that we've talked about penalties, let's talk about diminishing returns. So let's go on Prismatic, for example, and the most popular super in PvE right now is probably Golden Gun. So let's take a look at Golden Gun here. Our base cooldown is 916. And then if we move on here, we gain, 29 seconds on the cooldown to 847. From tier 4 to tier 5, we gain another, 23 seconds. And then from tier 5 to tier 6, that's another 22 seconds. And then from tier 6 to tier 7, that's another 22 seconds. But you can see the more that we invest, the less time that we get off of our super for investing. Now, here's where the biggest error in Destiny stat distribution happens. I see a lot of players investing up to tier 10 intellect. But you should stop at tier 7 because this is like the sweet spot of the diminishing returns. Stop at tier 7 because we have like 29 seconds, 28 seconds, 22, 22, 22, whatever it was. We're getting a lot of time shaved off of our super for investing up to this point. But if we go onward, we gain another 13 seconds, 12 seconds, and then 6 seconds. The jump from tier 9 to 10 especially is very pathetic. You gain next to nothing for investing all the way up to tier 10, but you get the most bang for your buck. You get the most out of it for stopping at tier 7. You don't get much for investing beyond this point. Honestly, I feel like it's just a waste of stat investment. So this is the concept of diminishing returns in a nutshell. So let's segue that over to mobility on Hunter here for our dodge. Another very common stat mistake I see players make is they want to go tier 10 mobility on their Hunter, but that is such a waste because from tier 9, look at our Gambler's dodge and our Marksman dodge, 23 seconds, 17 seconds. When we go up to tier 10, we only get 1 second shaved off of our cooldown, which is really not worth it. So you can see here from tier 3, our base cooldown on Gambler's dodge, 38 seconds. Right here, we gain plus 4 seconds, and then plus 3 seconds, plus 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, and then the jump to 100, 1 second. It is not worth the extra stat point there. However, Marksman dodge is a little bit different. We got a 28 second base cooldown at 3, and then we gain plus 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, and then 1 second to tier 7, and then 2 seconds, 2 seconds, and then 1 second to 100. So because there's a 1 second jump from 6 to 7, I would say a good low end sweet spot for Marksman dodge is to stop at tier 6. Now, diminishing returns works a little bit differently and uniquely on resilience, recovery, discipline, and strength. So let's jump over to recovery next. Now, when it comes to PvP, do yourself a favor and invest into tier 10 recovery because diminishing returns actually works the opposite way on recovery as opposed to the other abilities. On the other abilities, you get the most time shaved off of your cooldown at the lower end tiers, and then it starts diminishing upward. On recovery, it's the opposite way. The lower tiers suck and it gets better as you invest more. So let's take a look at the total regen time for reference here. The total regen time is 9 seconds flat. To tier 1, we get 0.2 seconds shaved off, and then 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. And then it starts going up from here. 6 to 7, we get 0.4 seconds shaved off, and then 0.4, 0.4, and ultimately from 9 to 10, 0.6 seconds shaved off. So diminishing returns just worked itself in reverse and turned into diminishing gains on recovery. So this is why maximum recovery is so good in Crucible. Now, when it comes to resilience in PvP, that's a whole entirely different topic that we'll talk about later. But for PvE, just always invest into tier 10. It's the most important stat in PvE. But the way it works is it's like all over the place. Like for example, here you gain 2%, and then 1, and then 2, and then 4, and then 5, and then 3, 3, 4, 3, 3. So it feels like resilience in PvE is like kind of all over the place in terms of the way it works mechanically, but still, just always invest tier 10 in PvE. Now, diminishing returns works very strangely on discipline and strength. It's different than all the others. So for example, let's look at our arc bolt grenade. Has 145 and then down to 135, that's 10 seconds, and then a bonus 8 seconds, and then 7 seconds, and then 5 seconds. You see it diminishing? So you would expect it to diminish further to 4 seconds, just like Intellect did. But nope, instead of going to 4 seconds, we gain another 8 seconds, and then 7 seconds, and then 8 seconds. It climbs back up from 8 to 10 instead of diminishing further like Intellect did. Same thing goes for strength all the way through. The diminishing returns, the idea of diminishing returns ends at tier 8 and then jumps drastically to 100. So if you're doing a build based around melees or nades, it's a very good idea to invest into tier 10 because of the giant jump in the cooldown. And remember, tier 2s are bare minimum, but the middle and sweet spot, it's kind of a gray area for discipline and strength because, you know, there's that jump at tier 8, but it also gains you a lot for getting to tier 10. If you can hit tier 10 though, I guess a good high-end sweet spot is tier 8. But then if you kind of care about the ability but can't invest too much, 5, I would say, is a nice middle ground where you get like enough of a gain, but then it starts to diminish afterwards. So like 5 or 8 or 10, 2 is the minimum. So that is what I would say for discipline and strength. Now, when it comes to your Warlock, Rift, and PvE, it actually follows through with the diminishing returns like Intellect did. So it doesn't reverse from 8 to 10. It actually keeps going down. Therefore, if you look at our Rift ability, our Healing Rift 122 down to 114, that's 8 seconds, and then 6 seconds, and then 5 seconds, and then 5 seconds, and then it just goes down 4, 3, 3. So I would say where you get the most out of it for your Rift, I would say tier 7 is a good place to stop. Phoenix Dive, however, goes from 55 to 50. That's 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds, and then it starts to diminish 2 seconds, 2 seconds. So for Phoenix Dive, I would say stop at 8, but if you're running a Rift, stop at tier 7. Now, when it comes to talking about resilience in PvP and how much you should invest, that's a whole different rabbit hole that you can do an entire 30-minute video on. I know Drewski did a solid video on PvP resilience, and you should definitely go and check that out. But I'm not going to dive too deep into that topic here. TLDR, the resilience sweet spots are tier 2, tier 7, and tier 10. So you can go on D2 Foundry if you want to investigate a bunch of resilience checks on your own. I wanted to bring up a couple popular ones here, like 120 RPM hand cannons, such as the Igneous Hammer. You'll get 2 head and 1 bodied if you are not at tier 7 resilience, and 340 RPM pulses like the Red Death are very popular, the Messenger, the No Time to Explain. They'll be a little bit less forgiving if you hit tier 7 resilience as well. And 390 pulses are not popular, thank goodness, because I typically run low resilience, and you'll get 2 tapped if you're below tier 4. But again, if you're at tier 7, they're going to be a lot less forgiving as well if you do happen to run into those. And I'm sure there's a lot more tier 7 resilience checks I can't think of off the top of my head, but yeah, tier 2, 7, and 10 are the main checkpoints, I would say. So once again, hit tier 2 if you can't afford to invest, hit tier 7 if you want to invest, and hit tier 10 if you are a Titan. I see way too many hunters and warlocks investing 100 in resilience, and that's just a waste of stat points. Don't get me wrong, 100 resilience passes a few checks, but not enough to warrant that kind of investment when you're not a Titan. So I think that about explains everything I needed to explain. So let's do one final run through of the optimal tiers to invest in as a wrap up to this video. So for mobility and hunter, do tier 9 maximum, but you can afford to do tier 6 if you're running marksman dodge. If you're running another class, don't bother with mobility. And for resilience, do 2 or 7, but do 10 if you're a Titan. And if you're doing PvE, always do tier 10 no matter what class you are. For recovery and PvP, always do tier 10. But for PvE, if you're a Warlock, do 7 if you're using a Rift, and 8 if you're using Phoenix Dive, and for other classes, don't bother. For discipline and strength, do tier 2 if you don't care, do tier 5 if you kinda care, tier 8 if you really care, and tier 10 if your build is based around it. And for intellect, do tier 3 or tier 7, and that about wraps it up. Follow this guide and it will really help you min-max your builds and stop wasting points. You can get more ability uptime and more out of your builds if you invest your stats properly. So if this video has helped you out, and if you learned something, I would appreciate if you share this video with a friend who you think might benefit from it as well. And if you enjoyed, be sure to drop a like and a comment because it boosts the algorithm and helps the video out. And if you are new here, please consider subscribing as we are extremely close to hitting 50k subs, and you can help me get there, and thank you so much if you do. And with that, I will catch you in the next video. See you later.